welcome to Live Interactive English. I'm your host, Winnie.
And I'm Nina.
And today we are talking about the Netherlands, which a lot of people know if you're from the Netherlands, that means you're Dutch. And on my mother's side, actually, I have some Dutch ancestry, some Dutch blood, but I have never actually been to the Netherlands.
Oh, okay.
Have you?
I've been actually. Yeah,
okay.
I did a little trip. I think I went to Germany and we drove from Frankfurt, I think, to the Netherlands. So we did a little trip and it was a long drive, but it was really nice. I went with my best friend. It was a day trip. We walked around the streets, did some cycling. The weather was really nice. And I love like the little, I think they're like kind of like townhouses. I loved it. It's so gorgeous.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will, maybe they don't know the name, the Netherlands, but once you see the windmills and, you know, Van Gogh paintings, you'll think, I know that. That's where it's from.
Exactly.
Well, today we're talking about why isn't the Netherlands underwater?
Oh, should it be?
Well, so we'll get into it a little bit today with why isn't the Netherlands underwater?
Okay.
The Netherlands is a country that, in spite of its size, has had a big impact on world history, producing many famous artists, scientists, and political leaders. However, perhaps the country's most impressive achievement is that it exists at all, as around a quarter of the nation's territory is below sea level. So why isn't that land underwater? Well, much of the land that now makes up the Netherlands was once underwater. Starting in the 12th century, wetlands were drained, creating land that could be farmed or built on. These areas are called polders, and today, around half of the polders in northwest Europe are found in the Netherlands. Over the centuries, the Dutch built dikes to stop polders from flooding. However, these were not enough to prevent two enormous floods in 1916 and 1953.
Okay, it's time to get started on today's article. Why isn't the Netherlands underwater? And that's kind of a strange question.
Yeah, because if you don't know that it's supposed to be or not, then you're like, oh, why would you ask that? Why, why isn't Taiwan underwater, for example? But underwater means below the surface of water. So, for example, the fish swam underwater.
Right.
Or you can also say she wore an underwater camera. Right. So you can use it as an adverb or an adjective. Yeah,
so there are a lot of, nowadays there's a lot of technology that is for underwater because people know for example, your watch, you can use that underwater. So it means that you can use it above water and underwater. So continuing on, the Netherlands is a country that, in spite of its size, has had a big impact on world history, producing many famous artists, scientists, and political leaders, which we kind of touched on in the title, which was Vincent van Gogh. A lot of people know, Starry Night and the Sunflower one, I think that was him. And basically we're talking about all of these Dutch people who had a big impact on our world history. And to have an impact on someone or something means when one object comes in contact with another with force. But in this case, we're talking about when something has affected something. So a lot of Dutch culture and a lot of the things from the Netherlands has affected our world. So for example, the new law had a big impact on businesses.
Okay. However, perhaps the country's most impressive achievement is that it exists at all. So it's most impressive that it actually exists. At all, as in maybe it shouldn't. Okay. As around a quarter of the nation's territory is below sea level.
So when they say exists, they literally mean the fact that it's there.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be below sea level, underwater. I wonder how come it isn't.
Yes. So why isn't that land underwater?
Hello， 大家好，我是 Hanny。今天的课文标题还蛮有意思的，他写到
Why isn't the Netherlands underwater? 为什么荷兰没有被淹没？好，那么 underwater 它可以当副词或形容词去表达在海面下的或者是在水下的。那么课文提到荷兰是一个尽管面积不大，但是却对世界历史影响深远的国家，孕育出许多著名的艺术家、科学家和政治领袖。不过，也许这个国家最令人惊叹的成就就是它居然能够存在，因为大约有1/4的国土是位于海平面以下。那为什么它没有被淹没呢？我们先看单字 impact， 它表示影响、冲击，在这边当名词。那文中用到 at all 来加强语气，表达说竟然存在的意思。那这边还有一个重点是 as 当连接词的用法。首先，它可以指因为、由于，像是 Greg may need some help as he's new to the job. Greg 可能需要协助，因为他才刚开始做这份工作。第二个，我们可以用 as 来表达当什么发生的时候，或者是随着什么什么。举例来说 ，They showed up as I was about to leave. 当我正要离开时，他们就出现了。接华课文中。Well, much of the land that now makes up the Netherlands was once underwater. Okay, it was once underwater. Starting in the 12th century, wetlands were drained, creating land that could be farmed or built on. Okay, so they were drained. When you drain something, you take the water out of it, right?
Okay. Exactly. So it's funny because when I think of Europe, because I come from Singapore, so I see a lot of wetlands.
Yeah.
That's very common. Even in Asia, we have a lot of wetlands, and it's very humid in Asia. But when I think Europe, I'm thinking very dry, different type of land. So I'm pretty surprised that the Netherlands was once a wetland. These areas are called polders, and today around half of the polders in Northwest Europe are found in the Netherlands.
Okay, so a lot of them.
Okay, so before they were obviously wetlands, but now they wanted to make it not only livable, you know, for these people to not have to swim to work, but also they want to make sure that you can grow food, build houses without them sinking.
Yeah.
So these places are actually called polders, and I didn't even know they had a name.
Oh, that's really cool. Over the centuries, the Dutch built dikes to stop polders from flooding. Okay, so dikes, is that kind of like a dam or something?
Kind of. So it's kind of like when you go to Venice in Italy, you'll see the canals where they have these beautiful gondolas that are kind of flowing. So you have a lot of typically in places with a lot of water, you'll see these rock formations.
Oh, on the side, right?
Yeah, they kind of form this. It's kind of like a sewage, but not for, in this case, it's not for poop. It's for water to kind of flow, but without having it, flood over to, for example, the sidewalks and where people live.
All right, so they have dikes to stop the polders from flooding.
Right. So continuing on, however, these were not enough to prevent 2 enormous floods in 1916 and 1953.
Wow.
I would still say that's pretty good, though.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know that there were these 2 enormous floods, but if you did know, then you're like, okay, there's a reason why these floods are happening. Maybe this, the land wasn't like this naturally, right?
Yeah.
So there were enormous floods. Enormous means very, very big. For example, elephants are enormous animals.
Exactly. So this really lets us know by using enormous how big these floods were to, up until now was pretty okay, not a lot of flooding.
Yeah.
But then, for these, which I would say a very smart invention for its time.
Yeah.
But it couldn't stop these really big natural disasters.
课文提到说，如今构成荷兰的大部分土地曾经位于水面下。那我们这边先来介绍 make up， 它可以指组成、构成。我们要表达某事物由什么组成，包含什么什么。句型可以用到组成分子加 make up 加整体，也可以用到整体 be made up of 加上组成分子。举例来说 ，numerous islands make up the country。也可以说 The country is made up of numerous islands. 那个国家由许多岛屿组成。
好，那从12世纪开始，人们开始抽干湿地，创造出可以耕种或者是建造的土地。那这些区域被称为了 polder 渔田。如今，欧洲西北部的渔田大约有一半位于荷兰。那几个世纪以来，荷兰人修建堤坝来防止渔田被洪水淹没，但这些还是不足以抵挡1916年和1953年的2场大洪水。好，单字 enormous 它是形容词，形容巨大的，像体积啊、数量、规模等等是巨大的、庞大的。Wetland 是湿地、沼泽地。Dike 是堤坝。那么 Winnie 老师这时候有提到 sewage 这个字 S-E-W-A-G-E， 那它表示污水、废水。像我们说 sewage system 就是表达污水系统、下水道系统。那接下课文中。
Well, so I'm very impressed so far by the architecture and the smart planning of the Dutch people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now it's a beautiful place to visit. They've done really well with it, and you should definitely go sometime.
Okay, well, maybe I'll take this little break to go.
In response to these events, the government built the Zuiderzee and Delta Works, which together form the most extensive network of flood defenses in the world. Among these defenses is the Maeslantkering, a huge €450 million barrier that closes automatically when floods threaten the city of Rotterdam. As sea levels rise due to climate change, countries across the planet should look to the Dutch for inspiration. If any nation can show us the way to handle the challenges ahead, it's the Netherlands.
Welcome back from the break. Before the break, we were introduced to something very special about the Netherlands, which is their dikes, which were what helped the polders. And the polders were once lands that were very wet, but in order to make it habitable or able to live in, they drained all the water so that they became very livable. And so part of that was dikes, which they used to make these canals, these rock formations that kind of, not necessarily get rid of the water, but make sure that it's flowing here so that it doesn't flood to, the sidewalks and the bakeries and whatever. Yeah.
Okay, continuing. In response to these events meaning the big floods that happened, the government built the Zuiderzee and Delta Works, which together form the most extensive network of flood defenses in the world.
Wow.
Okay, well, you learn from your mistakes. So now after having these two incidents and massive floods, they know how to fix it, and they have such a big network to prevent it from ever happening again. Right. And it makes sense that, they have the most extensive network of flood defenses in the world because they have to deal with that, right?
Yeah, and if you have especially in a place where a lot of people live there, it's because it's a very popular place to live in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So you gotta make sure that your people are safe.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So continuing on,
among these defenses is the Maeslantkering,
a huge €450 million barrier that closes automatically when floods threaten the city of Rotterdam.
That is so cool. Ooh. So even if worst case scenario, something does happen or is about to happen, they have this huge barrier that can close and protect the city.
So it's a good defense system.
Yes.
An expensive
Very
defense
expensive.
system. €450 million.
Well, that's what it takes to run a country.
Yeah. So what does it mean to have a defense? A defense means something that stops things from passing or attacking. So usually when you're talking about war or even sports, you have a good defense. So you are defending your team, your country, whatever. But in this case, we're not talking about anything attacking us per se, but we are talking about water and lots of it. So you have to have a good defense. So for example, the castle had strong defenses, so the people inside were safe.
Yes, and so we use this barrier, very expensive barrier.
Yeah.
A barrier is something that blocks the way. So in this case, it's blocking the way of the water from flooding the city. For example, for safety, barriers were put up at the side of the road.
刚刚说人们抽干湿地，创造出可以耕种或建造的土地。Winnie 老师这时候用到 habitable 或是念作 habitable 这个形容词 H-A-B-I-T-A-B-L-E 它可以形容是适合居住的。那课文提到说，为了因应这些事件，也就是大洪水，荷兰政府建造了2大工程，构成了世界上覆盖面积最广的防洪网络。那这些防洪设施有包括一座耗资4亿5千万欧元的防潮闸。那这个巨大屏障能够在洪水威胁鹿特丹市的时候自动关闭。好，单字 defense 它表示防御设施或保卫。Barrier 它表示屏障、栅栏或是障碍物，还有路障的意思。那在讲到大洪水时 ，Nina 老师用到一个形容词 massive，massive 表示巨大的、大量的或是大规模的。介华课文中。
So continuing, as sea levels rise due to climate change, countries across the planet should look to the Dutch for inspiration.
Well, so as we know that climate change is a very real thing, and it's something that they've had to deal with in probably the later years, like last 60 to 100 years, because back then they didn't really have that big of a flooding problem.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think with our modern day, climate change is affecting them. So why should we look to the Dutch for inspiration? So the inspiration means an influence and an idea that people would really like to copy or try out because they say, they did it and it worked for them, so we might as well learn from them. So for example, nature is a great inspiration for poets and painters. Continuing on, if any nation can show us the way to handle the challenges ahead, it's the Netherlands. And actually, a lot of people know that the Netherlands is also a very tech-savvy country.
Oh, yeah.
They're very ahead of the times for, AI, technology, all that stuff. So it makes sense that they kind of know how to deal with their challenges.
Okay, that's awesome. So we finally know why the Netherlands isn't underwater when it should be.
Exactly.
So they really worked hard to get to where they are. They built an amazing environment, amazing place for people to visit. And I definitely need to go there again soon.
Yeah. And I heard that the Netherlands actually has the most bicycle riders.
Yeah, they're all riding their bicycles in the Netherlands. It's so nice though.
Yeah, they're very
I understand
green.
why.
Yeah.
课文最后提到，随着气候变迁导致海平面上升，世界各国应该向荷兰人汲取灵感。Winnie 老师这时候说，荷兰是个精通科技的国家。老师用到 tech savvy， 就是形容精通科技的。那么文中用到 look to the Dutch for inspiration 来表达向荷兰人汲取灵感。Inspiration 就是灵感来源或是启发。那它还用到句型 look to 名词 for something 是表达希望什么什么提供某物。Look to 在这边是指仰赖、指望或依靠。我们可以用 look to somebody for something 表达指望某人提供某事物，也可以用 look to somebody to 加原形动词表达寄望某人做某事。那这边造2个例句。He looked to his friends for advice. 他指望朋友能提供建议。They looked to me to find a solution. 他们寄望我能够找出解决方案。好，介华课文中。
Okay, well, that's all we have for today. We hope you enjoyed this episode and go to the Netherlands.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
Bye.
The Netherlands is a country that, in spite of its size, has had a big impact on world history, producing many famous artists, scientists, and political leaders. However, perhaps the country's most impressive achievement is that it exists at all, as around a quarter of the nation's territory is below sea level. So why isn't that land underwater? Well, much of the land that now makes up the Netherlands was once underwater. Starting in the 12th century, wetlands were drained, creating land that could be farmed or built on. These areas are called polders, and today around half of the polders in northwest Europe are found in the Netherlands. Over the centuries, the Dutch built dikes to stop polders from flooding. However, these were not enough to prevent 2 enormous floods in 1916 and 1953. In response to these events, the government built the Zuiderzee and Delta Works, which together form the most extensive network of flood defenses in the world. Among these defenses is the Maaslandkering, a huge €450 million barrier that closes automatically when floods threaten the city of Rotterdam. As sea levels rise due to climate change, countries across the planet should look to the Dutch for inspiration. If any nation can show us the way to handle the challenges ahead, it's the Netherlands.
最后，我们来复习今天课文里面的单字文法。那单字部分有 impact 当名词表示影响、冲击 ；enormous 是形容像体积、数量、规模等等是巨大的、庞大的 ；defense 是名词表示防御、防御设施或是保卫。Barrier 这个名词表示屏障、栅栏、障碍物或者是路障。Inspiration 这个名词则表示灵感、灵感来源或是启发。文法的部分，我们第一个学到 as 当连接词，第一个可以表达因为、由于，第二个可以表达当什么发生的时候，或是随着什么什么。第二个重点学到 make up 表达某事物由什么组成或是包含什么什么的时候，句型可以用到组成分子加 make up 加整体，或是用到整体加上 be made up of 加组成分子。第三个学到 look to 可以表达仰赖、指望、依靠，可以用 look to somebody for something 表达指望某人提供某事物，也可以用 look to somebody to 加原形动词表达寄望某人做某事。好，那以上是今天的讲解，同学别走开，马上回来哦。
That was a good workout.
That was a really good workout, but I'm really hungry now.
Well, you know, after a good workout, that means it's time to carbo load.
Carbo load.
You know, it's like when you eat a lot of carbs, rice, bread, pasta, all of the good stuff.
Oh, that sounds so good. Okay, let's go and have breakfast. Okay, today we are going to talk about pancakes.
But it's not the pancakes maybe some foreigners might be thinking of.
Yeah, so when we think of pancakes, maybe we think of sweet, fluffy, round pancakes. But we're in Taiwan right now, so that's not what that means.
Right, in Taiwan, there is a savory breakfast pancake. And there's two types of pancakes that we're going to talk about today. First off, it is what we have right here, 葱抓饼. In English, it's just called a scallion pancake, and it could be used to describe 葱抓饼 or 葱油饼. But today we have 葱抓饼. You can choose whether or not you want to have an egg in it.
Right, to make it feel more like a breakfast food.
Yeah,
right?
you don't have to though.
Yeah, so this is kind of my expertise. I'm an expert at it because I love dancing. And so this is where foreigners are usually like, wait, what? I was thinking of a pancake, like syrup and butter. No. We're talking about a savory pancake. Today, we added a slice of ham. You can also put cheese. And we like to put a little hash brown in it to kind of be fancy.
Yeah.
But that's all we have for today. Remember, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to message us. KiWi later.